and do our monthly live stream. So this is a live stream that I typically do through my private paid group on Facebook for those individuals that have purchased my online courses. And I decided today to stream through my whole platform, all my platforms, instead, to just give you a little taste of what it's like inside our private paid Facebook group to participate in the live streams, because this is something that you gain access to when you purchase one of my courses. And for the holiday season, we are doing a special promotion on my signature course called Healing Attachment Wounds. And this is a 7-lesson course that uses mindfulness and creative arts interventions to help take you from self-doubting to self-sovereign so you can experience those soul-shaking, passionate partnerships that you want. So if you are interested in learning more about that, we have a 50% off promotion going on this month. After we finish our live stream here, I will post the link and information in the caption of this video wherever we are streaming. And you can also continue to ask questions, posting them in the comments below, and we will be monitoring it until the end of the month. So for today, I wanted to address some of the questions that came up inside our group, and they were tagged me on the feed. There were 2 that stood out to me, and I'm going to try to address them in detail because I think that they will really capture some of the subcategorical questions that came up. But as you are joining me here today, if you would like to type your name and where you are coming from in the chat box there, I can give you a little shout out. It also lets me know that I can see and hear you okay. Let's see if I can, maybe while y'all are joining me and typing that in there, I can pop a link in if you're interested in learning more about healing attachment wounds. I'm really excited about this course actually because it is totally revamped. So I first released it 3 or 4 years ago, and that was kind of what got me into the online space. And just every year's learned so much more information. So I've added a lot more content. So including there's 40 to 50 page workbooks for each lesson. There's 7 new arts-based tutorials, 7 new 30 to 45 minute lectures per lesson. There's lots of bonus content as well. We have 3 guest experts, bonus presentations, one of whom is Kyle Benson, who works at the Love Lab in Seattle with John Gottman. For those of you that don't know, John Gottman, he wrote a book called 7 Principles That Make Marriage Work. It was a best-selling book. And so Kyle works in the Love Lab with John Gottman and also offered a bonus lesson for our Healing Attachment Wounds course. So I'm super excited about it. I'm going to pop a link here in the caption. Let's see if you can see that okay, if you are interested in checking it out. All right, so the first question that I wanted to address has to do with a question that popped up in my multiple platforms, actually. How can I get my avoidant partner to acknowledge the truth of our love, right? And before I dive into that, I just want to say hello. We've got Dana, welcome. We have Michelle, we have Larry. Hi there, we have Diane, Dana, coming in from Iowa, welcome. We have Megan, hi, happy to have you here today. Okay, so I'm just going to pull up my notes here. This is kind of a long one, but I wanted to offer a lot of positive language and inspirational reframes because I think we're all needing a little bit of inspiration these days. So have you ever felt frustrated when you express your deepest, most tender feelings to a partner, and maybe you even utter to them for the first time, I love you? And instead of them taking you into their arms and saying it back, they kind of arch their eyebrows and emotionally pull away. Or maybe they offer no explanation, or maybe they mutter something like, you're just in love with the idea of being in love. I think this really has nothing to do with me. And so as a result, you might find yourself wondering, how could you ever possibly express your love so that your partner is able to receive it and you? And then really wanting to know the exact words and actions that you would need to say and take in order to feel as connected to them as you would like to be. Well, if this sounds familiar, you're not alone in that. In my online community, individuals often share posts and comments expressing these very same thoughts and feelings and experiences. So most recently, this question came up: how can I make my avoidant partner recognize our love? And another member said, would saying I love you reassure an avoidant partner and bring them closer? And so I invite you to stick around for this video segment, because in this segment, I'm going to talk about 3 steps to finding what I call the divine lesson in attracting a partner like this, and how to approach whatever the next steps might be in love. So make sure you stick around. Now, to begin, I want to start by repeating the question. How can I make my avoidant partner recognize our love? Would saying I love you reassure an avoidant partner and bring them closer? Now, before addressing any machinations we might want to enact in the external world, the first thing I would do is I would recommend that you accept the premise that the external world, including your partners in it, are usually reflecting something back to you about you. So they are embodying an aspect of you that is seeking integration or acknowledgement. And so it calls into your external experience someone that will challenge your accepted notions about yourself well enough that you will finally pay attention to what is going on inside you. So in a nutshell, partners that appear to operate in the opposite way that you would on the outside are a clever way that the universe gifts you a spiritual mirror of self-discovery. So for example, while anxious open hearts love to hear things like, I love you, for Rolling Stones, these statements can be laden with negative connotations and assumptions. So an avoidant Rolling Stone partner may have had the experience of words meaning very little, or of words, especially like, I love you, being used as tools of emotional manipulation with very little action to back them up. Now, I know many a Rolling Stone who would say, you're not in love with me. You're in love with the idea of being in love. And if you truly love a Rolling Stone, the best way to say it is through patience, consistent action, honoring your own boundaries, being a relatively independent person, and using your words to articulate something that you notice about them specifically and individually. I would not use generic terms like I love you, which for them is often meaningless at best or triggering, offensive, and a turnoff at worst. Now, this might sound a little harsh or confusing, but I would have you consider, just for a moment, are you really in love with the idea of being in love? Why are you drawn to someone that is so independently oriented with wounds around the subject? Are you trying to save them? What will that prove to you about yourself? What wounds are you carrying around unacknowledged? Now, again, I recommend that you accept the premise that the external world, including your partners in it, are usually reflecting something back to you about you. And so to change anything in the external world, you have to start with your internal world. Now, most people can't start there. We are too conditioned to be preoccupied with the external world to really see any kind of internal process at first. So we're going to roll with that before we tackle step number 1, or in order to tackle step number 1, and that is step number 1. Ask yourself, what are you wanting from the external world of form? How do you think that having that thing is going to make you feel? And what does that idea gratify for you on a deeper level? So someone who might ask the questions that I just posed might say something like, I want to be with my soulmate because then I can finally start living my life in the way that I always dreamed. I think this person is my soulmate because I feel so good when I'm with them. I believe I can't feel that way in any other circumstance, and I can't be my fullest self without this person. Now, it is often the case, particularly with individuals that are emotionally perceptive and intelligent, like an anxious open heart, that you may see a certain inner dynamic or struggle going on in your partner, which they are as yet unaware of or unwilling to acknowledge because for whatever reason they're not ready to. And in fact, they may never be ready to, and perhaps that is their purpose among the collective. And you being a lighted being and wanting to share that love and connection, you root for the side of that struggle, which, if it were to win out, would lead to an expanding love between you both. You identify that part of them as their truth, the truth of their beingness. And this isn't necessarily wrong from a certain point of view. But you're also ignoring that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. And you're neglecting the fact that they have a relationship to their own inner conflict that may be serving them in ways that don't necessarily serve you or what you think you want, beyond helping you to recognize what it is that you truly want. So there is a softness around this initially, a kind of receptive witnessing, and that is your strength and your gift. And if you have a partner that is willing to receive that, then the growth potential is unlimited. But if your partner persists in a disconnection from themselves, for whatever reason it might serve them, now your ego and your physical attachment system feels threatened and you feel triggered. And that means there is a lesson in their inner conflict that is meant to be a mirror for you to learn something more about yourself in the butting up against them. So for example, if your psychic and emotional boundaries have fallen because you don't know how to be loving and compassionate without abandoning yourself entirely, then you absorb their disconnection from themselves, and now you feel disconnected from yourself in addition to feeling disconnected from them. So you're disconnected from your own source energy, or let's call it spirit. And that's because you've primarily been using that person as a point of focus or a conduit for having access to yourself. And we all do this. It's not a judgment or an accusation. It's just one very dominant way in which we've been trained to relate to people. And this is not to suggest that we should never, ever, ever do that. But it is a way in which we've been taught to do primarily. And that becomes an issue when you encounter things like heartbreak or being with an incompatible partner. So for example, let's say a heterosexual couple has been dating for a while, and Tom is still in sporadic contact with his ex, we'll call her Kim, and they maintain a friendship. And their relationship ended a long time ago, and Tom claims that they are still only genuinely platonic feelings between them. Now, let's say Jane is Tom's current girlfriend, and for the most part, she's not really bothered by that friendship. Kim lives in another state anyway, and they only see each other maybe once a year. But every time Tom gets on the phone with Kim, his ex, Jane gets the sense that Kim is relying on Tom for emotional comfort and support. And Tom likes to play the role of rescuer, and he's gratified by Kim's neediness. This irritates Jane, and it makes her feel envious and jealous. She also slips into comparing herself to Kim, who is a rather attractive and successful woman. And so many people remain on the surface when analyzing a situation like this. They jump to assumptions about the meaning of these interactions. Oh, they must still carry a flame for each other. He's still holding on to all his options and struggling with FOMO. She's just waiting for a conflict in the relationship to get him back. He's trying to triangulate the situation and gaslight Jane. Or maybe they're just friends and Jane is overly sensitive and insecure. Blah, 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 blah. Right? Well, let's say that Jane is a bit insecure, but she's also very emotionally intelligent and perceptive. And her understanding of Tom's rescuer tendencies is tipping her off to something emotionally important, not only for understanding the nature of their relationship, but also for Jane understanding her own nature. Because when someone has rescuer tendencies, they typically are validation seeking, and they seek it from the outside world. And they want and like to be needed, to be relied upon. That does gratify them. And so there is a need to be needed and validated. And so Tom's needs to be needed and validated are what's actually getting under James' skin. And when that happens, he becomes subject to external conditions, specifically, potentially, subject to the seduction of a beautiful woman crying on his shoulder asking for comfort. And while Tom comforts Kim and gratifies his need to be needed and validated, Jane senses the risk involved and becomes increasingly jealous and envious as a defensive response, because this is her very same crutch. In sensing Tom's insecurity, his need for external validation and attention, she feels her own need to be the sole recipient of his attention and validation. Why aren't I enough? She asks herself. And while she is simmering in this not enough feeling, Tom is chatting with Kim, attempting to band-aid his own not enough feeling. And so Tom and Jane are really a perfect vibrational match for each other. But now Jane's feelings become sharp and hard and inflexible, and maybe she falls back on mechanisms of control to find relief from the anxiety that this creates. Then, in addition to seeing, understanding, and empathizing with the inner struggle she witnesses in Tom, she heaps on top of it all these agendas and action plans for how she thinks that they should behave to improve the reestablishment of their connection to each other, which might make it easier for her to reestablish a connection to herself. And also, it leads us down this road of slipping into believing a rather damaging myth that we tend to perpetuate in relationships, which is that understanding leads to agreement. And so it sounds something kind of like this. I want my partner to see what I see and to do what I think would be best, because I think if they really understood my perspective, then they would agree with my perspective. And that will make us more deeply connected in the ways that feel good to me. And so my assertion of this perspective onto them, onto the notion of truth itself, is really for their own good. Whatever they are experiencing is just old baggage getting in the way. It's not the truth of our experience here in this moment. Now, I would also add that this perspective is probably the perspective of your partner as well, but from their side of the fence, which is why you both are most likely attracted to each other, but also butting heads. So that's the first step, recognizing what it is that you are looking for in the external world and understanding that as a mirror for your own internal vibe, let's say. Now, the second step is that support that. So when you say something like, why can't they see the truth of our love? Why can't they understand that this just is the way it is? You basically confirm that it is not the way it is, not entirely, because you are identifying a contradiction, a contrast, a boundary line, a disagreement, and a truth by its very nature. Because truth by its very nature is the absence of disagreement. So truth is what it is because its, rightness is agreed upon by all involved. But when your partner sees something different than you, then this truth is called into question. And when they see something different, you start assigning an intention to that. Oh, they just don't want to see. And it's like wagging a finger at a petulant child. This kind of assignment of intention serves to buttress your perspective as truth, the truth, and as being in the right about every version of things. And if people don't want to accept it, then they're just being difficult. They're misbehaving. They're not expanding. They're not fulfilling their potential. But the truth is that you see one thing and they see something else. You're motivated by one desire and they're motivated by another. So the truth is that there's a conflict. There's a contradiction. There's a contrast. There's something that does not quite fit. There is something that separates you. And this is only intolerable when we haven't quite learned how to allow for the possibility of multiple realities or creative solutions. That's the truth. The truth, such as it stands, is that you both disagree about something, and it's likely to be something important, or you wouldn't be asking about how to deal with it. So you might sense that maybe someone has strong feelings for you, an avoidant partner, let's say, and you see that those strong feelings, you see that as their truth, but maybe they don't acknowledge those feelings within themselves, or maybe they refuse to label it out loud, or maybe they don't want to commit to it. In essence, they don't prioritize that feeling in the same way that you do. But that lack of prioritization, you determine, well, that must be the lie, you say. But each part is an equal truth. Their loving feelings, it is a piece of the pie, but it's not the whole pie. The whole truth might be that they are not willing to take action on it. The whole truth might be that you're ready for something that they are not, or that you are trying to be ready for something that they are not. But if you cling to someone that is not ready, then you're really not ready either, because now there's something that you are also refusing to acknowledge in your emotional reality as well. And that is why you're both together here in this moment in this relationship, because as I said before, it's likely you're a perfect vibrational match. So when we focus upon one sliver of truth and we call it the whole of reality, we make everything and everyone else wrong, and we turn it into a villain. We turn it into a lie. And you take one slice of the pie and you deny the fact that there are 5 slices left. They can rot for all you care. And so those extra slices get mad and they feel rejected and dismissed by you, and they armor up and they refuse to be ignored. And then the inner and the outer conflict increases in your relationship, and your partner gets increasingly irritated with you and pushes you away even more because you're not willing to see and eat all their slices, only the one slice that fits your mold. And yet here you are trying to hog the whole pie. So how do you deal with that? Well, a lot of us crawl into a hole and cry ourselves to sleep every night Because unless we're willing to open up and take a 360-degree look at what is actually going on around us, we're not going to be able to navigate our way through it. And so this is another metaphor. If you've lost your keys in a parking lot and night has fallen, don't only look wherever the street lamp shines, especially if you've dropped your keys in the shadows, because otherwise you're never going to find them. So don't only look wherever it is that you want to look, where it's easiest to look, where everyone else is telling you to look, even where your partner may want you to focus your attention. Look at the whole picture, and you are always a part of it. And when we start claiming that our perception of things is the way things are to the exclusion of other people's realities, that's when we start dismissing and invalidating other people's experiences in search of validation. And we start clinging to things like potential, right? We start calling potential the truth, but it's not the truth. It's called potential because it doesn't exist in physical form yet. And everything has potential. Of course it does. Everything stems from source. Everything is an experiment. The potential might even be a grand and great idea. But chasing down a good idea that cannot be executed is actually a bad idea because it keeps you running in circles, it drains your energy and resources, and it is nowhere near the truth. Not of your relationship, though it could be a reflection of what you want the relationship to be. And that is what makes it such valuable information, because now you can start to extract the essence of what you really desire from an ego attachment and a preoccupation with the idea that it has to be with this person who perhaps reflects back to you, again, a slice of that pie that you want, but you're just refusing to eat the whole thing. So rather than say to yourself, oh, I must be so stupid for attracting this person or for being attracted to this person because look at all those other 5 slices I don't like, you might try saying to yourself, wow, my attractive energy must be really expanding because look at this pie. It has one whole slice that relates to exactly what I want, a slice that I did not have before. I did that. I attracted that and I cultivated it. And now I know what it's like to experience a slice of what I want. And that gave me an idea of what more might be out there. All right, universe, you're on. I'm game. I see this can really work in my favor. Because I'm discerning, I recognize that holding on to these extra slices that I don't like and I won't eat doesn't serve me or the pie, because maybe there's someone else out there that likes this flavor just fine. And if there's one pie with at least one slice for me out there, the odds are pretty great that there are even more pies with more slices that I would be willing to eat. But giving me this pie now, that builds trust between you and me, universe. So I'm going to pass this on and leave my plate open and ready for my next course, because who knows? With my luck, maybe a whole ice cream sundae is going to show up next. Now, the inability to do this originates from attachment impulses of the physical body, and then the ego attaches stories to those sensations to justify why we are yearning so deeply, which is primarily based on survival fears of the nervous system and the limbic brain in combination with our social conditioning. And if you want to learn more about that and the body's role in informing the way we form these ego attachments, I invite you to check out a video of mine on YouTube. It's called Ego Attachment versus Attachment Theory. And I have another one that we recorded last month called Trigger Mapping and Your Window of Tolerance, if you want to learn more about that. Now, the third step, and I know this is a long segment, but I really wanted to get into this because I think it affects a lot of the questions people are asking. The third step is to identify and adopt a new belief system that includes building a reframing bridge, and what I just articulated is an example of a reframing bridge, and a statement to help you see the possibilities of love in the world for you. So let's just for a moment say that you are willing to accept what I'm saying. How do you deal with it then? So would you sink into an acceptance of the presence of multiple realities, right? And if so, it might sound something like this. I am so grateful for the opportunity to have found a partner that reflects back to me aspects of what I truly desire in long-term relationship. And through our interactions together, I've become increasingly aware of an expanding desire for deepening intimacy and soul-deep connection with a partner. I've become aware that there is a bigger pie out there. As this desire of mine has expanded, I now come to realize that the essence of what I want may be larger than the containment of our current relationship contract. And while I see the divine spark and potential for who you may become and or for what this relationship could be, if you were perhaps at a different phase in your process, I must acknowledge that I am already at a particular phase in my process. And I must take steps to find creative solutions in order to honor both of our processes and our unique realities, because each one is equally valid and important. If I take your reality as my own, I fail to show up authentically, and we will no longer be able to truly connect. And if I attempt to push my reality onto you, I dismiss who you are, and we will no longer be able to see or receive each other, which will also mean that we are no longer able to truly connect. That does not serve either of us or our purposes here on earth. I cannot stunt my own growth, keep myself small, or attempt to lower my expectations so as to try to fit into the small box of egoically constructed ideas about what something should be, fueled by a fear-based survival need and attachment need. And so now I release my ego attachments and fantasies about who I might want you to be in service of my satisfaction, and instead remain open to receiving exactly who you are in this moment. And I embrace the idea that you have a separate reality from mine, and that you are the expert on how you are living and experiencing that reality. And I am the expert in how I am living and experiencing my reality. And both of these realities can exist simultaneously with conscious and compassionate communication that acknowledges our contrasts and our differences in experience, values, beliefs, and perspectives. In fact, this contrast is the very thing that adds to the variety and the spice of life, and it stimulates my attraction to you, at the same time challenging my assumptions about what is true, and even my assumptions about who I am. I surrender to the wisdom of spirit in the universe as it sends to me signs and inklings each and every day throughout my interactions with people, and my allowance for sinking into the present moment, and a willingness to see people for how they experience themselves in this present moment, even if that is a state of ambivalence, even if that is a state of indecision, even if that is a state of transience or disconnection. I acknowledge that their disconnection from themselves is not a reflection of my worth and value, and it is not my responsibility to solve that for them or to inspire them out of it. Though from a place of abundance and self-knowing, I can offer emotional attunement and a willingness to empathize, support, and be generous again, without abandoning myself to inhabit their truth or a dismissing of their truth in order to assert mine over them. As I move through the world in this way, a veil will be pulled away from my eyes. I will come to recognize that fantasy and romanticism are not preferable to this multiverse of unending realities, but rather pale in comparison to this mesmerizingly divine and surprising kaleidoscope. So fantasies and romanticism are constrained by the limits of your ego, by what you have experienced so far. But when you open up and you surrender those fantasies and you just allow like this, the possibilities, they are beyond your wildest dreams, and they fall within reach. And you recognize that each moment is in fact a miraculous gift, and the depths of intimacy are boundless, and you get to have it all. So I wanted to just offer that today, because sometimes we get lost in the intellectualism, but sometimes when we can put the words together in a way that opens up the possibilities for us, then it does. So I just want to acknowledge the chat box here. You've given me an amazing start on my new journey. I'm so glad. Hello there. Welcome. Welcome from Athens, Greece, from Byron Bay, Australia. Hi there. I'm in your Anxious Attachment 101 course. It's tough though, so revealing, and for me, it can be a painful process. Sometimes when we're going through a process of unfolding into ourselves, it's kind of like when you have like when the sink is clogged up, and you got to go in and you got to remove the clog or whatever's plugging it up, and you extract it, and then you turn on the water, and the water, what happens? It tends to run brown for a little while, doesn't it? And that's because all of the plaque and the gunk and everything that has been building up and festering behind that plug now needs to kind of run through it, right? And that becomes the sort of, people say lean in, like that's the leaning in process. Okay, so, all right, people resonating with what I have to say. Do avoidant people have a tendency to be rescuers? Actually, I would say both anxious individuals and avoidant individuals have a tendency to be rescuers. Actually, in my Anxious 101 course and in my Avoidant 101 course, I talk about 4 archetypes for emotional boundaries, and rescuer is actually an archetype that I use to help us conceptualize emotional boundaries. So both avoidant partners and anxious partners can be rescuers, but it can manifest itself just a little bit differently. Okay. Yeah, being seen is huge. Okay, so everyone seems to be resonating with that. Thank you for all your wonderful comments and feedback. So the second topic I wanted to address, is also kind of a long one. So I want to make sure that I get this information to you. Second question that popped up had to do with boundaries and limit testing behavior, like healthy limit testing behavior versus red flags, right? So how do I know if what this person is doing is unhealthy like red flags, or if they're just trying to be discerning about boundaries, like if they're just expressing a boundary or trying to learn more about my boundaries, so on and so forth. So I wanted to share a little bit about that here today, and I'm gonna cover 4 specific scenarios because sometimes specificity is what really helps us out with this. So let's call this segment How to Tell the Difference Between Healthy Testing Behavior and Red Flags. So if you struggled with personal boundaries in love and you find yourself questioning the line between holding a boundary and making a discerning decision in love versus being emotionally abusive or manipulative, then this is a segment that you would want to stick around for, because we're going to talk about the nuances between normal and even healthy limit testing in relationships so that you can make a sound and discerning judgment about a potential partner versus the manipulative and emotionally abusive game playing that can sometimes occur in the extreme. And so in this segment, we're going to explore a few common scenarios that may leave you kind of scratching your head. And I'd like to offer some guidelines on how to interpret it. So more specifically, we're going to take a look at if a partner pulls back a little bit after having sex the first time, if a partner cancels a date out of the blue, if a partner ogles, dropping my mic, if a partner ogles another attractive person, or if a partner teases you with sarcasm and banter. Okay. So to dive in, I want to just kind of restate the question here. What does it mean to test a partner in order to make a discerning decision about whether or not you want to commit to that person long term? When does this testing cross over into manipulation or emotionally abusive mind games, right? Now, for the purposes of this segment, I'm going to define testing a partner and their limits as a form of boundary exploration. So the purpose of this exploration is usually to determine the compatibility of your long-term goals, values, and your character. So if you like someone and you're debating whether or not you want to commit yourself to them long-term, there are a few things that you're going to want to know about them before you make a decision like that. So in other words, are they someone who's going to stand their ground and demonstrate a little backbone in tough times, or are they going to crumble? Equally, if you're experiencing emotional distress, are they dismissive and unable to provide support, or are they warm, empathic, and loving? When faced with a challenge, do they withdraw and displace their fear and anger, or do they find creative solutions and reach out for help when required? Will they be confident and speak their mind as a relationship progresses, or will you have to make every single decision? So on and so forth. And so each of us will have our own little unique either or questions like this in our minds and in our hearts when we're evaluating potential partners. And when we meet new partners, inevitably we enact little tests around them, whether we're conscious of it or not. And this is actually, I would say, healthy to a certain degree, because at the basis of this, we are asking questions like, how might this person fit into my life? What would they contribute? Do they inspire feelings of warmth and generosity within me that compel me to contribute to them in an authentic way? Do I like myself around them, and do I feel joyful in their presence? Do they have a strength of character, and do we share the most important values that would sustain a relationship long term? As Esther Perel says, are you looking for a life story, or are you looking for a love story? I love that quote. Now, the culmination of these little testing behaviors will ultimately determine your answer, right? So part of being able to show up to relationships is being aware of when you are being tested and why. So it's also important to realize when this normal testing behavior crosses over from innocent discernment and character assessment, let's say, into emotionally manipulative or abusive behavior. Because when that happens, obviously, the result is a significantly decreased quality of life. So for today, I'm going to offer a few common and fairly innocent ways in which we might test each other early on in a dating relationship. I also compare these to a more extreme version. We might even call it an abusive version, which would be giant red flag flashing signs that your partner has to do some serious internal work before a relationship can evolve, a healthy one, let's say. So the first scenario I'd like to address is if a partner pulls back a little bit after having sex for the first time. So it's important to know that when we start testing our partners, it's actually a sign that we're becoming more emotionally involved with them because it feels as if we've got more to lose. So we are more cautious and increasingly tentative about our investment. And after the first time you sleep with someone, one or both partners might question what it means to the other person and even what it means to them. So more specifically, they will want to know, how is this going to evolve now? Does this change anything? And because we as a society do not necessarily teach our children how to talk about emotions directly, let alone about sexual interactions, we will do things indirectly to spark an emotional reaction in order to get that information. So in some cases, a partner may pull back to see if the other will chase. And if they do, it may prove affection and afford a sense of safety and control for the withdrawing party. It could also mean that the withdrawing party simply felt a degree of closeness that surprised them or made them unexpectedly apprehensive, and they are doing what they must to retain their equilibrium with a temporary cushion of emotional distance. Now, rather than respond impulsively to a withdrawal, I would advise naming it for what it is directly and compassionately in order to create a safe space to have an authentic dialogue about the meaning of sex for both of you. And this allows you to pass the test because you demonstrate personal integrity and kind of a no bullshit attitude while also communicating how you actually feel, which is what you're looking for. It also discourages indirect testing behaviors in the future while demonstrating that you are not to be controlled. You are an equal. And so when this turns into, on the other hand, when that kind of behavior bleeds into or turns into disrespect or manipulation is when the withdrawal is repeated and continual and unexplained and appears to be a clear rejection of intimacy or emotional honesty or a deeper opening up of the space between you. And so the intention becomes blatant, mean-spirited, controlling, and is usually a sign that the relationship has become about power dynamics and has eroded over time. Okay. Now, the second scenario is if a partner cancels a date out of the blue. So when this happens as an expression of testing behavior, or let's say boundary exploration, whether that is conscious or unconscious, it's often that the canceling party wants to know whether or not you are flexible. Now, notably, your partner will call to cancel and give you a heads up, usually. They may tell you that they're not sure if they can meet yet because maybe they have to work late. Can you play it by ear? They will want to know how you respond when plans change. Do you still have your own hobbies and passions, or does that all disappear when you get into a relationship? But they won't totally disrespect you or your time. Now, of course, there are occasions when all of us have to work late by surprise, and we have to make allowances for that. But if you have a gut feeling that this might be a test, my recommendation is to go entertain your own hobbies and passions. Don't wait around to find out if they can confirm those plans last minute. Then when they call you to confirm or not, let them know that you've moved on and made other plans because you didn't want them to feel any pressure. They've obviously been under a lot of pressure at work. You can invite them to participate in your new plans if you like, but the point is to demonstrate that you have your own life too, and that doesn't just stop or disappear because they unexpectedly have to work late. Now, this is music to the ears of any workaholic who experiences a lot of obligation and pressure at their workplace. It can also make you look like the exception to the rule when it comes to committed relationships. You're no ball and chain, and also you're there to support them. Of course, the goal here is to actually have alternative hobbies and pursuits that you enjoy just as much as you do spending time with your partner. So when you respond this way, it comes across as being authentic because it is, right? Because you are responding in this way from a place of self-sovereignty. Now, when this bleeds into manipulation is when they don't call at all and then they stand you up. Or maybe they make plans with you, don't show up, and then they call you the day or two later acting as if you never made plans. And then they convince you that it was just your misunderstanding. Or they may call you a week later with a really elaborate half-baked story, accepting no accountability and making it seem like you're the bad guy for overreacting and being upset. Now, even if their mother died, it takes 2 seconds to text someone that you're currently dating. My mother died and I need some time alone with family. I'll text you in a few days after the funeral. Okay, number 3. If a partner ogles another attractive person when they are with you. Now, often when partners are blatantly trying to make you jealous, it's because they're looking for reassurance that you care, or positioning themselves in the relationship power dynamic by pushing up against a boundary and testing your limits with this. So many individuals equate jealousy with caring, loving, interested, and attracted feelings. So needling you like this is intended to get a rise out of you, kind of like plugging a quarter in the pinball machine. They want to see you light up and blow some whistles and bells because that's a great show. And it can be deeply gratifying to know that someone is acting like this in response to something you did. It also lets them know who is driving the emotional control bus of the relationship. So if you'd rather not be a slave to this throughout the rest of your relationship, I suggest not giving into it. And the best way to do that is to maintain your own sense of self-sovereignty and desirability by keeping your jealousy and your insecurity in check. So if you want to know how to do that, I do have a YouTube video called 4 Must-Know Tips for Jealousy and Insecure Attachment Styles, which I invite you to check out to learn more about that in detail. Now, this becomes toxic when it is no longer playful or slight and infrequent, but all the time, and or to the point where they spend the whole night disrespectfully ignoring you while chatting up somebody else, blatantly propositioning someone else, hiding inappropriate communications and indiscretions, or actually cheating on you. Okay. And the last scenario is if a partner teases you with sarcasm or banter. Now, in Western culture, especially I would say in the United States, I've observed this, there is a way of relating to each other that consists of competition and control. And we might use sarcasm and banter to connect because we basically dismiss all other forms of emotionally honest exchange. They can also be ways of testing how emotional or vulnerable you can make someone. It's a form of toughening up emotionally while also a way of expressing affection sometimes. Now, sometimes you might think of this as a playful way of romantically sparring. So some partners want someone who will joke around and be their partner in crime, not necessarily a yes man or yes ma'am all the time. They want someone that they can kind of butt up against. Now, the provocation is a way of assessing if you'll be able to stand up for yourself without falling apart, if you can give as good as you get. And if you can, then this partner might trust you more. They may also be trying to assess your emotional buttons, which if they ever feel vulnerable in the relationship, they might choose to push in order to reassert their position. Now, if you prove yourself to not be so easily shaken, then they don't think that you can easily be manipulated, and you will earn their respect and likely a deeper sense of commitment. Now, when this bleeds into the realm of toxicity is when it becomes character assassination and emotional abuse, and people start hitting below the belt unnecessarily. That is unacceptable. And if at any time it feels as though the banter and the sarcasm has become an assault upon your esteem and sense of self-worth to the point where genuine feelings in exchange are being dismissed, or it's being used as a way to puff themselves up in comparison to you, then that is unacceptable, and I would not stick around for that. Okay. So these are those 4 scenarios again. If a partner pulls back a bit after having sex for the first time, they may be needing to assess their own feelings because now there's more to lose, right? There's a deepening going on in the relationship. It becomes toxic when it becomes repetitive, unexplained, and you start to feel as if you're being used. Secondly, if a partner cancels a date out of the blue, they may be trying to test your flexibility. I recommend that if they are going to ask you to play it by ear, you make alternative plans, that you actually have hobbies and pursuits that you enjoy doing as much as being with your partner. And if they do decide that they can meet you, invite them to your plans, right? If a partner ogles another attractive person when they are with you, it's likely that they're trying to make you jealous because they're looking for reassurance of your feelings and potentially trying to figure out who's got the emotional control here in the relationship. My recommendation is, if you'd rather not be a ping pong ball throughout the rest of the relationship, you don't respond to it in that way, and find a way to offer them the reassurance that they need without being pushed around by indirect tactics like this. And lastly, if a partner teases you with sarcasm or banter, they may be looking to see if you can stand up for yourself without crumbling, if you have a backbone, if you can give as good as you get. And this is a way of connecting and expressing affection in a way of kind of romantically sparring with each other. When it becomes toxic is when it bleeds into character assassination. Someone starts hitting below the belt or trying to tear down your esteem. That's unacceptable. It's abusive, and I recommend you exit right away. All right. So if this information resonates with you, and or if you find it helpful, I would love to type a yes in the chat box there. Let me know, and we can continue to create more content like this. I see a question pop up from Kim. Sometimes I use spirituality as an excuse to keep staying in a toxic family system. Thank you for educating us all with a balanced approach. Oh, thank you very much. I'm glad that you found that helpful. Does both seeking validation behind self-abandoning? So when we are seeking validation, usually we are looking for some information from the external world to affirm our existence, basically, to affirm our worthiness, to affirm our place in the world, to affirm our right to be here. And the right to exist is actually it's the lighted side of the root chakra, which is in your genital region. And it also is associated with body integrity. So when you're someone who's concerned about validation, you're actually questioning whether or not you exist. And you look to the external world to mirror back to you your existence through things like validation and affirmation. When that happens, you really have to work on this on the body level, because the root chakra is all about body integrity and how well you reside within yourself. So if that's something that you find yourself contending with, body activating experientials and modalities are where you have to go. And it may even be scary to go there. You know, the reasons that you need this affirmation and you question your existence is because you've been forced out of your body. You've been forced through dissociative states to leave your body because of trauma or other circumstances you couldn't control. But that's where you have to go in order to address the need for validation. And of course, this exists on a spectrum. There's degrees of this. There's severe degrees of this. And then there's the validation that each of us needs and wants on some level, but it's not going to completely dismantle the whole structure of our personality. If we don't, we might be upset for the afternoon if so-and-so doesn't validate our idea because we thought it was a great idea, but it's not going to completely dismantle our self and identity, right? Then there's the need for validation that does completely dismantle your sense of self and identity, right? So that all goes into the self-assessment process, right? But the thing that I guess I would have you consider is, what if you didn't need someone to validate you? Like, that's the thought that I would have you play with. What if you just accepted the premise that every thought, feeling, and emotion that you had was valid, independent of what anybody else said, did, or expressed to you? You just knew, yeah, no, anything I have to say is valid. It just is. There's no one, nothing could ever take that away from me. Who would you be? Who would you be? What would you do? Who would you love? What would interest you? What would light you up? What would excite you? If you were not seeking validation, if you knew that you had a right to exist, if you knew that everything you said, did, wanted, expressed in this world was valid and true, what happens after that? And then finding a way to line up with that, right? What about the silent treatment? My avoidant partner, when upset with me, stops talking to me. I learned to just chill and give space as he always comes back, but it feels like a manipulation. So this is the thing. This is kind of like boundary confusion, right? And it's a lot of what we kind of talked about in the first thing. So what that person is doing is they are doing what they must do in order to come back to you. So from the avoidant partner's perspective, taking time and space, they're doing what they must do to preserve their connection to you. And since that is not how you would necessarily deal with a conflict in the relationship, you may perceive it as a manipulation, right? Because in your constructs, it would be. Now, so in your truth, that would be manipulative. And why do you interpret it as manipulative? Well, because you're wanting something else, right? You would want them to respond in a different way. You would want them to need different things in order to repair a conflict, right? And since they are not expressing those things, but they're expressing another thing that makes you feel disconnect from them, now it feels like a manipulation, because how they're behaving, you experience an uncomfortable feeling in response to it. Now, there is the circumstance where people use things like withdrawal and the silent treatment to reposition themselves and have more control in the relationship. But the only way that is achievable is if you allow it to affect you in that way, right? If you allow for them to validate what's going on in the relationship, right? If you need them to validate. So this is where I actually might recommend, for a more in-depth explanation, checking out my video on YouTube. It's called 3 Tips for Communicating with an Avoidant Partner. And I give you some more specific examples of how to approach an avoidant partner and really suss out, is this something they are doing as a manipulative ploy, or is this really a coping mechanism that they are employing because they are trying to stay connected to you? Right. So this is how we tend to fall. Sue Johnson, in her book called Hold Me Tight, refers to these as demon dialogues. But one partner perceives the distance they take as a way of trying to control them, whereas the other partner is taking the distance because they're trying to find a way to repair and come back. Right. They're trying to find their way back to you. So this is where, there are some questions and some examples that you might reflect on to determine what is the case. Because there is the circumstance where people will use the silent treatment and withdrawal to try to emotionally punish someone for something. That does exist. But there is also the case where people withdraw because it's just what they need in order to regroup and come back to you in such a way that they are not afraid that they are going to ruin their own relationship. Right? I would keep in mind that sex addiction is a real thing, and if your partner's checking out on other people, this is worth reflectively considering. Yes. So I have another YouTube video that talks about sex addiction. I think it's called, is avoidant attachment related to sex, or what's it called? I released it last month, but it's sex addiction is a real thing. Where is it? It's like 5. It's funny because when I make these videos, I do them all with like certain color cover. And sometimes when people ask questions, I want to like try to direct them to where I've already addressed them. And then I'm like, what color was that? Was that a yellow cover? Was that a blue cover? And then that's how I remember things. Okay, so if you're interested in learning more about sex addiction, I have a video called Does a Lack of Sexual Interest Relate to Avoidant Attachment? So while a lack of sexual interest is in the title, actually in the content of the video, I talk about the other side of that, which is sex addiction, and how those things express themselves if you're interested. Any tips on helping people connect with their feelings after avoiding them for most of their life? So this is where I would actually have you check out my online courses, because that's in a nutshell what they do. I have a course called Avoidant Attachment 101, which is all geared on teaching you about my method called the McWilliam method. And it consists of 3 principal tools, and that is cognitive reframing, body activation, and arts-based experientials, which are all intended to be ways in which that you can learn to access your feelings in fun, easy, and creative ways. I would also recommend, for an immediate thing that you can do, I released a video on my YouTube channel called Trigger Mapping and the Window of Tolerance. I released another video called Creating Containment for Body-Based Experientials. And I have a playlist on my YouTube channel called Spirituality and Attachment. And there are a lot of experiential guided meditations and also guided creative interventions that are intended to help you explore your feeling states on a metaphorical level through creativity, rather than just spinning in circles, talking about it and writing about it all the time. You know, when we're talking and writing about our feelings all the time, we're accessing the left brain, but the feelings that you're experiencing are usually about right brain processing. So if you want to access your feelings and what are called your emotions and your affect states, which is usually what's stuck on repeat when we have insecure attachment, because it hasn't quite been integrated into left brain, neocortex, higher functioning trauma narratives. If you're trying to access right brain content and information. So I recommend checking out those playlists, because that will give you a little taste of what I do. And again, there should be a link in the caption of this video. I am offering a 50% off my signature course called Healing Attachment Wounds, which also goes through all of this stuff. And I talk about Healing Attachment Wounds is a particularly large course because I talk about the body, trauma-informed research, polyvagal theory. We talk about, I also add in my psycho-spiritual approach to things, the MacWilliam method in depth, creative arts interventions, limited beliefs and mindset reset. Like how do we reset our beliefs about things? So like Healing Attachment Wounds is kind of like the mother of all my courses. And so that's what's on promotion right now for 50% off. So there should be a link in the caption of the video for that. Okay, so if the avoidant takes space, withdraws very regular, useful only if they come back. It's worked through, communicated, withdraw to allow them to connect and preserve themselves. Well, you know, the other thing about avoidance, a lot of people think that avoidants just don't like being in a relationship, and why do they bother being in a relationship if you're avoidant? So that's kind of a misconception, right? So avoidance is just about distance and, you know, just being distant for everyone. It's about proximity. So proximity is not just distance. Proximity is, there is a certain space. So let's say you're between, you know, point A and point B. There's a certain proximity. There's a place in between point A and point B where every individual feels more or less comfortable with closeness, right? We think of it as like your personal bubble. Everybody has an energetic personal bubble. And oftentimes, based on our cultural upbringing, our own personal preferences, the way we experience our bodies, the way our energy resides in our bodies, we will have very specific feelings about how close you want someone to be to you. I mean, think about whenever you encounter like a close talker. How do you feel about close talkers? Are you a close talker? How do you express physical affection in your platonic relationships? How do you express physical affection in your romantic relationships? That's probably the easiest way I can have you conceptualize proximity, right? Is to think about it on the body level. Like, how much do you like people invading your personal bubble? Now take that premise, that construct, and extend it to emotional closeness, right? So everyone's going to have their own emotional personal bubble. And so avoidant individuals get that label because there is a threshold, a range of attitudes and behaviors within which whoever decided to come up with attachment styles, i.e. John Bowlby, Mary Main, Mary Ainsworth, so on, Chris Fraley, so on and so forth, decided that, okay, if you reach this threshold for frequency of this kind of behavior, then that must mean that your emotional personal bubble, we're going to label that avoidant, right? But one thing I want to add here is that the labels for attachment styles, which are avoidant, anxious, there are a lot of different labels in the literature, but there's also disorganized, which can also sometimes be called anxious avoidant or fearful avoidant, and secure, right? They're not good labels, and they're not good at describing what they describe, because number one, they are predetermining. People, you tell someone, oh, you're anxious, you have anxious attachment. Oh, I'm anxious. And now it becomes a predestined thing. Same thing with avoidance. So I don't like using those terms for people who are anxious. I refer to them as open hearts. For people who are avoidant, I refer to them as rolling stones. For people who have disorganized or fearful avoidant attachment, I call them spice of lifers, because I think if you have great suffering, then you also have great calling, and you have had probably the most experience with the contrasts of life. And therefore, you are usually providing for others the great variety and spice of life that life has to offer. And then we have secure cornerstones, I call them. So the second reason, number one, the labels are predetermining and they suck. So I don't like them, which is why I recreate them, but I use them because it's what's understood generically speaking. Then the second reason is they don't accurately describe what they describe. So when you say that when you take one category of people and you define the boundaries of that category as anxious, then when diagnostically you are in essence differentiating that as a primary symptom only of that group of people. But here's the thing. When you're avoidant, what are you avoiding? What are you avoiding? You're avoiding the anxiety that intimacy creates. You're avoiding the sense of threat that is generated through closeness. Same thing with spice of lifers. They experience tremendous anxiety as a result of ambivalence, right? A push-pull dynamic that they experience within themselves. And then the freeze response, which is, spice of lifers are really denoted by the presence of dissociation, dissociative tendencies, numbing out inexplicably, floating out of their body, not being fully present, right? Or exploding inexplicably and then not understanding how to organize their behaviors. They become chaotic in their expression, right? But everyone who has an insecure attachment style is anxious. So to create these labels like, anxious, avoidant, disorganized, or fearful avoidant, these labels are poor. They're not good labels because they don't really qualify what they're describing. I really think that polyvagal theory does it best because it grounds what we are observing anecdotally in the body, in the expression of the body, which is that anxiety and avoidance are two sides of the same coin because they are both they're fight or flight responses, activation of the sympathetic nervous system, which is why so many people who experience anxiety are like, yeah, but sometimes I feel avoidant, or people who are avoidant say, but sometimes I feel really anxious. And that's because your sympathetic nervous system is activated. And so in the moment, sometimes contextually speaking, you will choose one coping skill or the other, fight or flight. Most of us have a tendency, usually based on the combination of temperament and conditioning, epigenetics, for example, to choose one direction or the other as a primary coping skill. And that is because we often exist in environments that are consistent. Systems don't like change. Systems will usually kick out whatever variable is attempting to change it, right? Systems do not like change. So more often than not, we are raised in a system that is unchanging and that rejects anything that would change it. So our coping skills more often than not tend to be in one direction because we lived in a system that was unchanging. And if it's dysfunctional and unchanging, then you may have a deep groove in your mind and in your body for how you respond to things. And now you're labeled with an attachment style because you've been living that groove for so long. But if you've been in changing environments, then you may have chosen, you may have opted for different types of coping skills. If it was a completely confusing and chaotic and unpredictable environment, then you might freeze, right? Because there's nothing you can do. There's nothing, total helplessness. There's nothing you can do. So now you've got what's called dorsal vagal activation. It's a deeper layer of threat. And this is like the freeze response, right? So if we're talking about space, if we're talking about the avoidant partner in space, I really would encourage you to think of it not as, avoidant partners just want distance and I don't understand why they want a relationship anyway and they're just manipulating me and they're trying to, suck up my supply, that kind of thing. Instead, I would have you recognize it as proximity. It's not always about that. Sometimes it's really because they have a certain emotional personal bubble and there's a certain proximity at which they're okay, and maybe they don't like close talkers. And are you an emotionally close talker? And if you know this about yourself, then you're probably better suited to someone else who is also an emotionally close talker. But if you're, where are you on that spectrum? How well are you actually jiving? How well are you compatible with that person, right? So I just want to offer that as a way to kind of reconceptualize how we conceive of attachment styles in general, but also wanting and needing time and space. Because usually individuals who are avoidant, they don't actually want and or need time and space per se. What they're really looking for is emotional spaciousness. And the only way they know how to get it is to insert physical time and space between themselves and another person. And that is because avoidant partners, just like open hearts, just like spice of lifers, struggle with boundaries. So their boundaries can appear to be very hard and rigid, but remember, something that is hard and rigid is also fragile. And if you apply enough pressure, it crumbles quite easily, right? Someone who had really good boundaries wouldn't be threatened by a close talker. They would just say, hey, back up a bit. I don't need to go anywhere. You just need to back up a bit. But if, they have a fear of, they don't know how to sense that that's their own feeling. Okay, so if you don't know how that's your feeling, B, you don't know how to name and label it. C, you wouldn't know how to name and label it with enough specificity and understanding and perception of the other person's reality so that you can articulate it without triggering them. And then you have to be able to honor that boundary by putting it into action and withstanding the other person's expression of whatever their reality might be, accepting and holding and understanding that you're both allowed to have uncomfortable feelings and you're both allowed to have your own realities, and that both of those things can exist simultaneously without negating or invalidating the other. A lot of work. Adulting is a lot of work, especially if you're trying to do it securely. So with that, I might end. I see there's a lot more comments here in the chat box. Y'all are amazing. So I will take a look at these. I'm going to be coming back probably at some point next week, prior to Thanksgiving, most likely, or after Thanksgiving, just to kind of do another Q&A before the end of our promotion for Healing Attachment Wounds. Again, the live stream today is in promotion of my course, Healing Attachment Wounds with Mindfulness and Creative Arts Interventions. It is my baby. It's 7 lessons to help take you from self-doubting to self-sovereign, so you can call in those soul-shaking, passionate partnerships you want and do it in a fun, easy, and creative way. And this course is so robust. I mean, we talk about the neurochemistry of love. We talk about polyvagal theory, the effect of trauma on attachment styles. We talk about Helen Fisher and the 4 chemicals that relate to intermittent reinforcement with unstable partners. We talk about the anxious avoidant trap. We talk about all 4 attachment styles. We also talk about a spiritual framework for understanding these things, the divine lesson in all of it. Why now? Not just me. So we answer the why me question, and that kind of gets into the science of things, but we also have the why now, and that's the spiritual question, right? Because so many people who experience these relationships, there feels like there's a sense of divine timing in it. And I don't think that just because there is a science behind it, it does not discount that I do believe there is a divine message and or timing in it. And so the content in Healing Attachment Wounds helps you kind of pick that apart. We also talk about how to recognize patterns and to stop those patterns. And we also dig into limiting beliefs. Yes, this course, for every single lesson, there is an embodied practice. So each course includes cognitive reframing. It's wildly experiential. So each lesson has between 30 to 40 page workbook and transcript. But if you never listened to the lecture, if you never read the workbook, and you just jumped to the experiential exercises, each lesson has 2 or 3. So there's always there's usually, I think all of them have a guided meditation. All of them have an arts-based experiential and tutorial to digest whatever it is, whatever topic we're covering for that lesson. And all of them have a cognitive reframing. So there are 3 experiential exercises per lesson, in addition to a 30 to 40 minute recorded video lecture, plus the downloadable transcript and workbook, which gives you a record of everything. Right. So there's a lot of content in this course, more than any of my other courses. And then also you gain access to the private paid Facebook group, which is where I come and show up like this on a monthly basis. And we talk about the questions that come up in the group. And you get to participate in the discussion with other individuals who've also been participating in my online courses. And there's also 3 guest presentations with Kyle Benson, who works at the Love Lab in Seattle with John Gottman, a best-selling author and researcher. We also have a presentation with Kristen Von Fox, who is a shaman. She takes us through a guided shamanic journey to recover soul parts. So if you're someone who likes the spiritual angle, this is a special bonus for you. And we also have a special bonus with Sasha Fossa, who is a tantric sex coach and instructor, and also a certified erotic blueprints coach. And she gives us a special segment on sacred sexuality and how to bring that into our partnerships and relationships. So if you're intrigued, I invite you to check it out. There should be a link in the caption of this video. And if you have questions, you can also type them in the comments beneath this video. I'll keep an eye on them and answer them as we go. I am grateful for your attention here today, and I will be back most likely after the holiday to wrap up our promotion before it ends on the 30th. Thank you to everyone for joining me here today. I'm so grateful for all of your comments and responses, and I will be sure to read those in detail before I hop on again. Have a great holiday.